Along with our understanding of percentages, remember, the last one was introducing basic ideas with percents. In this course, what we really do is move beyond that, and we start talking about being able to be literate in the comparison of numbers using absolute and relative. And relative starts getting involved in fractions and percent. Show you what we're talking about. The absolute difference is the actual difference between a compared value and a particular reference value. The relative difference describes the size of the absolute difference as a fraction of the reference value. A really good idea of where this could come into play. I probably shouldn't be admitting this publicly over over something that the IRS could get involved in, but let's just say theoretically I know about something where a person was buying a garage door, and I told you that the person talked to the person buying the door, talked to the person who was installing the door, and said, hey, what if I give you cash? If I give you cash, how much money will you save? And the person said, I'll save you $400. Say, wow. So one person, he's putting in a little regular garage door. Saved me $400. Saved someone $400, sorry. And another person, they're doing a really, really big garage door, like a bay door for something huge like an RV. And they'll say, I'll save you $400. Well, in one sense, they're kind of the same because each guy's saving you $400. But the first garage door might only cost $1,500, so he's giving you like a third off almost. That's pretty powerful. The other door, don't ask me how I know this, costs $6,700. And so $400, that's not that much off of it. So sometimes the absolute difference is very important, but sometimes the relative difference is important. And in the relative difference, we make sure we compare it to a particular reference value. Now let's give you some examples of where you figure out both. The daily circulation of USA Today is about 2.2 million. And by the way, I was given these numbers. This was, I believe, written a few years ago, so I think the numbers are probably wrong now. The daily circulation of the New York Times is about 1.12 million. It's the third largest in the country. Find the absolute and relative difference. As a percentage, assume that the first quantity is the compared value and the second is the reference value. So remember, we'll go back to this just 1 second ago. When we do the absolute difference, it's compared minus reference, okay? Compared minus reference. And when we figure out the relative difference, we use the same thing, compared minus reference. So the first one is going to be the compared, and the second is going to be the reference. So figure out the absolute. Yeah, that should take you just a little bit. All right, so the absolute difference is 2,200,000. That's what 2.20 million is, written out as a whole number, minus 1.12 million, which is what this is, right? This is 1 million, 1.12. You subtract that and you get 1,080,000. So that's your absolute difference. But if you want the relative distance, you have to put in that 1,080,000 compared to the reference value, which is 1,120,000, and then it becomes 96.4%. Again, that's compared to the reference value of the New York Times circulation. So sometimes we have to compare that. What are we talking about? If we were talking about such a huge difference with the circulation of a very small newspaper, it'd be astronomical. If we did it for, like, if we were in Russia where they only have one newspaper, it wouldn't be that much at all. So we like to do it as a relative difference. And compared to the New York Times, it's a 96% change when you think about USA Today. Absolute and relative changes, okay? A diversified portfolio grows from $1,500 to $2,250. Now, the reference value is always the first value. It's the original or beginning value. That's always the reference because it's in comparison to that beginning value that things begin to change. So, first question, what's the absolute change? Now remember, it's the new value minus the reference or the original value. So what's the absolute change there? Let's do a little bit of stop and start. And when we do that, we'll get 2250 minus 1500 is $750. But now you know what's coming next. We're going to do the relative change. And the relative change is the absolute change. It is this 750, but you must compare it to, again, the reference value, the initial or starting amount. So the relative change is the absolute change, which we just figured out was $750 over the reference value. Now, if you don't want to look at it that way, you can look at it as the new value minus the reference value. But that is the absolute change. They are the same thing, so it doesn't make a difference how you look at it. And they're both over the reference value. So that would be 750 over 1,500, which is a 50% change. And if you invested $1,500 in your portfolio and you got back $2,250, it grew by 50% or half. Okay, you can read this and do stop and start. Go ahead. Okay, so the absolute change of Centerville, I did Centerville first, is the new value minus the reference, which is 29,000 minus 2,000. Again, you started at 27,000. It grew from the 27,000. From goes first. 29,000 minus 27,000 is a 2,000 change. And the absolute change for Clarksville, that's why I put a CLville here as opposed to CEville for Centerville. Clarksville would be new value minus reference, which is 2,200 minus 1,400, which is 800. So some people might conclude from that Centerville grew more than Clarksville. And in one sense, they are right. Their population changed by 2,000, whereas Clarksville's only changed by 800. But that doesn't show the whole picture. See, imagine if New York City increased its population by 2,000. Well, there's between 8 and 9 million people in New York City. To grow by 2,000 is like meaningless. I live in a town called Callicoon, New York. We have 800 people who live in the town. If Callicoon grows by 2,000 people, then everybody's going to think things are out of control, okay? So the absolute change only gives a part of the picture. For the relative change, the relative for Centerville would be the absolute change, which is 2,000. Oh, I'm sorry, we're doing Centerville. This is Clarksville. Sorry about that. This is Clarksville. The Clarksville change is 800, here it is, over the 2,200 they started with, which is 36.4%. And the Centerville, I had these reversed. I'm sorry. This is, again, I'm repeating. This is the relative of Clarksville here. It says Centerville, it is Clarksville. The relative for Centerville, says Clarksville, but it is Centerville, is the 2,000 change for Clarksville, or Centerville, sorry, over the 29,000 total, which is 6.9%. So other than some mislabeling by me, I think you get the idea. When the population changes 800 out of 2,200, then that is a huge change. It's a 36% change. When the population changes 2,000 out of almost 30,000, it's still a significant change, but it's not nearly as much. So the relative is an important thing that you must factor in when you consider what's going on. Okay, let's get a little bit more relative and let's talk about consumer debt in the United States. It increased from $130 billion in 1974 to 2.15 trillion in 2005. That's an astronomical number. We're now at 2021. Can you only imagine what that number is? Well, you're not going to have to imagine for long because we will talk about debt a little bit later when we cover the longest chapter in the book, which is money management. Super important chapter, especially for a teacher. Find the absolute and relative change as a percentage. Go ahead. Stop and start. Okay, so the absolute change is the new value minus the reference value. So the new value is, and I did them as 2,150 billion, and the other one is 130 billion. And when I subtract that, I get 2020. But since we're talking billions, I added on the extra zeros at the end. Okay. Again, billions, so that is where the extra zeros come from. Now, as far as the relative change goes, remember the formula. It's just the absolute change out of the reference value. So this is the relative change out of the reference value. So the relative change is 2020 out of 130, which is a 1,553.8% relative change. That is an astronomical change. That means it's more than 15 times as much. More than 15 and a half. Okay, next up, use percentages for a comparison of versus more than. Carol earns 50% more than William. How much times larger is her income, than his? She's 50% more than William. How many times larger is her income than his? Well, this is where quantitative fluency and literacy sure come in handy. I'm going to do my best to try to explain this. If you're really comfortable with percents, it's very easy. If you're not, you may have to listen to this a few times to make it make sense to you. So, the first thing I want you to understand is that 50% is a half. Okay, it's 50 out of 100, right? Percent out of 100. So Carol earns 50% more, which is the same exact amount as her husband William, plus another 50%. So if she's at the same exact amount as William, she's at 100% of William. And then if she's 50% more, it's the 100% plus the 50%. So she earns 150% of what William makes. Okay? So when it's more than versus of means in comparison to the other person. So if you make 150% of theirs, you're making the 100%, plus you're making an extra 50% as well. Okay, next up, of versus less than. A store is having a 25% off sale. How does the item's sale price compare to its original price? Now, obviously, it's going to be less because the sale is off. So you're going to pay 25% less than the original price. So if the original price is 100% and you're going to pay 25% less than that, then you're paying 75% of the original cost. Okay? So it's how things work with of. 75% of that cost because 25% is taken away. Remember, 75 and 25 always add up to 100. Okay? All right. Let's try one more of these slides. Or maybe two. Using percentages for comparison. Of versus more than or less than. If the compared value is more than, you add that value. And that's what we did when we said the 100% plus the 50%. If it's less than, we subtract the value. And listen, that makes a lot of sense, right? More than is always an increase. You're going up, you're adding. And less than is always a decrease. So you're going down, you are subtracting. Okay, don't let the P here bother you. This is just saying it's P% more, so you add the percent, P for percent. This is P% less, so you subtract the P. More than you add, less than you minus. Pretty straightforward. The area of Norway is 24% more than the area of Colorado. So Norway's area is what percent of Colorado's area? Figure it out, stop and start. Well, it's going to be 124%. It's 24% more than, so that's the 24 here, and here's the 100% that is the mark that was the same, but then it's 24% more, so 100 plus 24 is 124%. Henry earns 45% less than Ingrid, so his salary is what percent of Ingrid's salary? Well, it's less than, so you have to subtract, right? So 100 minus 45 is 55%. Now we get into a quick little review, a very brief review on ratios. Ratio is a comparison between two quantities, but they have to have the same units or type. Okay? So if we want to do the example of the price of item A is $80 and the price of item B is $20, you can do that. But you can't do $80 and 20 euros. Okay? We want to keep the same. In this case, dollar is the same. So the ratio of A to B is $80 to $20, which is 4 to 1, which means it's $4 to $1. Now, The absolute change or difference of percentages. Sometimes it's the percent that changes, okay? Example, suppose a bank increases its interest rate from 3 to 4%. The absolute change is the new value minus the reference value. In this case, the new value is 4%. The reference or original value is 3%. So 4 minus 3 is 1% change. But that's the absolute change. It's not the relative change. The relative change is really, really big. Okay? For the relative change, going from 3% to 4%, that's the 1% change that you started with, but it's only out of 3%. So 1% out of 3% is a 0.33 change, which is 33%. Okay, so when it's a relative change or difference of percents, it just means you work with percents as your denominator, that's all. So what are some key points to remember? About absolute, let's remember key points about absolute. How much change? I just care about the numerical difference. I don't care about how it compares to anything else. Just tell me the amount that it changed. So for instance, if it changed from 100 to 300, the absolute change is $200. End of story. The quantity stands alone in and of itself. Now, relative means we're going to compare it to something. Okay, so it changed $200, but 200 out of what? Okay, so relative involves a comparison, a part of the original or reference amount. The quantity is always given in relation, hence the word relative, to another. Okay, that leaves us with one more video on percents for the day.